Yes, hello and good evening. Um, Today we will talk about automated pit stops in the various simulations using the AI-based race engineer. We will take a look at the configuration requirements to make simulator controller able to control the pit stop dialogues in the various games. And we will also talk about when automated pit stops are available and in what situations the race engineer will take what action. And at the end, we will also have a short session on track to see all these in action. As always, feel free to intervene with questions if there are any. Um, okay, so let's start. I think those of you who are using the simulator controller package already know that the most prominent feature of the software package is the race assistant or the race assistants. There are three of them. And especially the race engineer is capable to help you in the time consuming and sometimes, depending on the track, very difficult and dangerous task of preparing the pit stop settings for an upcoming pit stop. Um, to do this, the assistant must know about the current fuel amount you have in your car, the tire pressures, and for sure the remaining stint time from which the refuel amount and the tire pressures after the tire change will be calculated. Um, we will come to that a little bit later. But first we have to start with the configuration requirements, and there is something I really don't like, especially for two of the sims which are supported by simulator controller. Especially the configuration for Assetto Corsa Competizione and for Race Room Racing Experience is quite difficult, to be honest. The reason for that is that ACC and also R3E or Race Room Racing Experience does not provide any API or interface for external programs to control the pit stop dialog. To do this anyway is only possible by placing keyboard commands in the keyboard buffer so that the simulation thinks that you have typed something on the keyboard. For example, cursor down, cursor up, cursor left, cursor right to navigate to the various settings in the pit stop dialog and to choose the different options. Let's take a look at the pit stop dialog for Assetto Corsa Competizione. As you can see here, there are several options. You navigate using the cursor up and down keys from top to bottom or bottom to top. And when you want to change one of the options, you can use the cursor left and cursor right keys. That's more or less the same, for example, for Race Room Racing Experience. But I think you can imagine that the number of available options can change. For example, when I tick the change tires check mark here, all the other fields here will disappear. And therefore, it is possible that your navigation controlled by the race engineer using the cursor up and down keys will navigate to the nirvana in the end. Long story short, to understand what is currently available in the pit stop dialog of ACC or what is currently available in the pit stop dialog of Race Room Racing Experience is handled by an image recognition algorithm, which you have to support for your specific screen resolution and for your chosen user interface language. Here you will see it in English, but you may have German or an Italian user interface language, so you will see different labels here, which I will search for, or my program will search for, to understand what is the current structure and the current available options in the Pitstop dialog. There are several ways to do this. First, you have to take a look at the available or necessary pictures I am searching for in the various simulations. In the program directory, in the resources directory, there is a folder screen images, and there are two folders for ACC and Race Room Racing Experience. And therein you will find the pictures I am using to understand what the Pitstop dialog currently shows. For my screen resolution, which is a triple screen full HD setup, and my chosen interface language, these are the pictures I am using. But for different resolutions or different user interface languages, you will have to create your own pictures. This is not necessary, I want to come back to this, for Automobilista 2, for R Factor, and for iRacing, because there an API, an application programmer's interface, exists to control the pit stop settings from the outside of the simulation game. It's only necessary for ACC and Race Room Racing Experience. To define your own pictures, as always, you will have them in your Documente or Documents folder, and there in the Simulator Controller folder, and there you will find a folder named Screen Images, where you can place your own images created using, for example, the snippet tool, or by any other means you can take the pictures from your screen. But there is help for some of you, because let me go back here, because there are already some packages which are available as presets in the simulator setup application. We will go there in a few seconds. These presets are located in resources, setup presets, and if you have a configuration which is already here, for example, white HD single screen HDR setup in German.de, you may use these pictures. The most simple method to use these pictures is to run the simulator setup application, which is starting up at currently. A few seconds, so it's there. And you will find the presets here. And for example, pit stop images for ACC, single, white QHD, no HDR in English. If you move them over here, you will see that they will be automatically copied to your local simulator controller screen images location, and depending on your configuration, that is it. It will function. If not, you can take these pictures on your own using the snippet tool, for example, as said. Okay. For ACC and for ACC only, there is a so-called fallback mechanism. The fallback will do the following. If the pictures cannot be found or have not been installed, the fallback mechanism assumes that you have a dialog setting most similar to this one here, which means you will have a race where refueling is allowed. You will always change tires. You will never change brakes. What is missing here is the select driver option, which is assumed to be there. Yes, the repair options are there always. This setup, which is used for the fallback, is the most common one for endurance races, for team races. So if you're running an endurance race and you does not have any pictures installed or there are not found, they have not been found, this fallback mechanism will allow you to use the pit stop automation anyway. And the feedback that this fallback mechanism is used by the software is that you will hear 3 warning tones of Windows when the pit stop dialog is opened. I do not recommend to use the fallback, but it is, it's a fallback. It's a safety net for very important races when something goes wrong. Okay, any questions so far?
Yes.
Okay.
Taking the pictures for yourself, I imagine that will have to be quite precise, cutting out the words basically.
Not really, because let's take a look at the pictures again. It is not necessary that they have to be precise. As you can see here, I have a bigger border than here. What the system does is simply it searches for a screen area which is more or less similar to the pixels found in this picture. You can even leave out the D at the end. It will anyway find compound without the D. So you don't have to be so precise.
Okay, clear. And then my other question is, in my case, I'm running a triple screen setup with, I'm not sure what it's called, 2560 by 1440.
This is a
that
way
covered?
WQHD.
Okay.
So it should be one of the presets.
Okay, clear.
Anyway, I have heard of that even the presets which are taken with the same configuration won't work on a given system. So maybe there are differences in monitor color color collections or stuff like that. I don't know. What always works if you are taking the pictures, the images on your screen. This will always work.
Okay, and why are there then different versions for different resolutions? Because in my case, I'm not running exactly 2560 by 1440, but I'm running a bezel corrected resolution.
Okay.
Will that work, or do I then always have to take the pictures myself?
I don't know. Please try.
Okay,
you will hear 3 warning tones if the pictures has not been found, and you can also take a look at the log files where a lot of error messages will be there. There is a small application in our Discord under Tools and Fixes. Here, you will find it under Tools and Fixes, debugging the ACC Pitstop image recognition or the Race Room Racing Pitstop image recognition. It's a small application you can download and put it in your binaries folder. When you are in ACC, for example, on the track, you start this program and it will tell you which pictures has been found or not has been found.
Okay.
So this
Nice.
might be helpful in debugging your pictures, your images. Okay. This is it for the nasty stuff of configuration. There is another thing to mention. The race engineer needs to know the cold or the starting tire pressures to calculate the precise pressures for an upcoming pit stop. And there are two ways to tell the race engineer these pressures. In the configuration, you can, for example, for Assetto Corsa Competizione, tell him that at session begin, the tire pressures should be loaded from settings, which means that the tire pressures, the cold tire pressures, will be taken from the race settings. Here, you enter it at the beginning of the session. You can import them from the simulation, from the simulator, which means, and there is indeed an API available in ACC. You can read the currently selected tire pressures from the first strategy, which is sometimes in the middle of the setup screen, somewhere in the middle of the setup screen, and there is a button. It is named in English "Use Current Pressures." So when you have set up your cold tire pressures just before your race, go to the strategy screen. I think it's named Fuel and Strategy in English. And click on the button Use Current Pressures so that the current pressures in the strategy and the ones you selected for your tire setup are identical. These values can I read using an API from ACC, and this is named Import from Simulator. So you have two methods. Enter them here in the race settings just before the race, or use, as I do, import from simulator, but be sure that you always press use current pressures just before you go to the track. Import from simulator is also supported for R factor, but not for the other ones. This is written in the documentation, so please take a look there, which is supported for which simulation. That's it for this. And yes, another note. For Automobilista 2, the pit stop control is done using the so-called ICM, the in-control menu. I don't know what ICM stands for. It's named ICM. It's a menu which you can open up to control various settings of the current session, including all the setup for the upcoming pit stop. The requirement for a simulator controller to handle the pit stop is that you leave the ICM completely untouched using this session. In-car menu. Okay, thank you, Peter. Yes, in-car menu. So leave the in-car menu completely untouched. Otherwise, the navigation in this menu will go into the nirvana because simulator controller does not know what the current position of the menu selection is. And image recognition does not work there because the menu does not have any images you can search for. It's simply a text menu. Okay, that's all the nasty stuff up front. Now let's come to the fun part. First of all, there are 6 different ways to request a pit stop management from the race engineer. The race engineer is a chatbot, so you will always have the voice interface. So, for example, you can say, "Hey Jonah," or whatever you name your assistant. And then the next phrase will be, "Can you plan a pit stop?" This is the first trigger to start with the pit stop planning and preparation. But you can also use a button. We have seen in the setup and configuration tutorial that you have various ways to configure button boxes or Stream Deck using Simulator Controller. And I, for myself, for example, have this button on my Stream Deck, which is named Plan, which is similar to asking, "Can you plan the pit stop?" Depending on the current race situation, for example, when you are in a close fight, it will be much faster and much safer to simply press a button than issuing a voice command, playing with the push to talk button, and so on. The third situation where Jonah or the race engineer will come to life by its own is when you are running out of fuel. As you can see here in the race settings, you can set the pit stop warning to any number of laps before your final run out of fuel. 2 means that the race engineer will contact you on its own 2 laps before you finally will run out of fuel. I think there is 1 more lap possible using the safety margin, because you can set here, for example, in the strategy, the so-called safety fuel or reserve fuel level. So with 2 laps warning, it might be the case that you will get the warning 4 or 3 laps before you really will stand on the side with no more fuel left in the tank. Jonah will ask you if the pit stop plan and preparation should be started, and if you then answer yes by voice control, or if you're using the accept button of the corresponding action on the Stream Deck or on the button box, the pit stop planning and preparation will start. The fourth situation, or the fourth trigger where the pit stop planning will begin, is when the race engineer has derived that the damage you have collected during your accidents and the resulting degradation of lap times are so high that a pit stop, an unplanned pit stop, will be beneficial. He will contact you and will ask you if he or she should plan and prepare a pit stop. There are 2 more left. The fifth trigger is by the race strategist. If you have prepared a race strategy for the race using the strategy workbench and have set this strategy as the strategy for the current race, we have a tutorial for the strategy workbench already online where we have talked about that. The race strategist will come alive a few laps before the planned pit stop and will ask you if the race engineer should be informed to plan and prepare the pit stop. In this case, the amount of refueling and the fact if you want to change or not want to change tires are determined by the strategy. So the engineer will only calculate the tire pressures. If you are not satisfied with these choices, you can override them. So you will override the strategy, to be precise. We will see that a little bit later. So, and the last one, and we will have a tutorial about this topic, I think in 2 weeks, is when you are using the race center in a team race. The race center allows any team member which is currently not driving to enter the pit stop requirements in the race center and send these settings to the currently driving computer, let's say it so. And the race engineer will pick up this information and will plan and prepare a pit stop using these settings. So you have, to reiterate it, you have 6 different ways to plan and prepare a pit stop. Okay. I have mentioned many times now this 2-step process: plan a pit stop and prepare a pit stop. We will see it in detail in the practice session in a few minutes, but a little bit of theory up front. The process of performing a pit stop using the race engineer requires these 2 steps. The first one is the plan phase, where the race engineer gathers all the data, the current hot tire pressures, the left amount of fuel in the tank, the weather conditions and all that stuff, and creates a pit stop plan, which in the end means it calculates the amount of fuel to refill, whether to change or not to change tires, and the tire pressures, the required repairs, and so on. It will tell you all these decisions using voice output, and you can decide if you are satisfied with these choices and you are able to override or change them afterwards. Once you are satisfied, you can ask the engineer to prepare the pit stop, which simply means open up the pit stop dialog and enter all these settings into the dialog. After this has been done, you have a second chance to change these settings. But we will see this also in the live demo. Okay, any questions so far?
Not for me.
Not, okay. Let me take a look here. From this one, most of this is relevant for the strategist, but only the safety fuel you need to remember, because this is the amount of fuel the engineer takes into account when it calculates the pit stop warning. Some words about this one here. I said that the engineer calculates the cold tire pressures to be applied during the pit stop, and it uses this either by using this as the base pressures at the start of the session or importing them from the simulator. And to calculate the resulting cold tire pressures for the next set of tires, the engineer must know the ideal hot tire pressures for the given car, given track, given simulator, and so on. For most of the cars in ACC, for example, and most of the tracks, you will have ideal hot tire pressures for 27.6 currently with the current tire model. With the older tire model, it's 27.7. But there are tracks out there where, because of long straights or other special circumstances on the track, you have other ideal hot tire pressures. We have seen that already in the session about managing settings. You can enter track-specific and car-specific hot tire pressures in the session database and load these at the beginning of a session from the database, which will help you that you haven't to use the race settings for each and every race just before you go onto the track and change these values all the time. These three fields or checkboxes above are also important. Let's start with the threshold here. The threshold means that a change of the original cold tire pressure, for example this one, will be taken into account by the engineer once the hot tire pressure on a given tire deviates from the ideal value by this threshold. For example, if you are higher than 27.8 or lower than 27.4 in this case, the engineer will start to correct the cold tire pressure for the next pit stop. You will also have the option to take additional corrections into account. Very handful is, for example, in the endurance races, this one. The engineer takes a look at the temperature trend, and if you have constantly falling temperatures, for example, when you are running an evening session, it will increase the tire pressure even further so that the ideal tire pressure is somewhere in the middle of the upcoming stint. You will have a little bit too high pressure at the beginning and a little bit too low, but overall you will have the ideal tire pressure. If the cold tire pressures will be increased by 0.1, for example, when the temperatures are falling. And yes, there is another correction possible when you have very big, large amount of tire pressures in your database. The engineer will also take a look at the database, which are the best tire pressures there for given weather, air temperature, and track temperature combination, which is especially important if you have to switch the tire compound during the session because it begins to rain. The engineer will then take a look into the session database and take the cold tire pressures from there, because any calculation is not possible in this situation when you have to change the compound. Okay, this is this. So now I think we can head onto the track. I will start ACC. But before I do this, I had configured picture-in-picture for the recording, so that the ACC screen is visible in the recording as well. And I will switch the screen for the Discord session. So you must now. Okay, do you see the simulator screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So now we will conduct a short race on Kyalami and use all that which we have talked about before. Okay.
Stay double file.
Before the engineer can conduct a pit stop, you will have to run a few laps so that all the data is in the knowledge base. The number of laps can be set in the configuration. This is so-called learning laps. I have set them to 1, so we only have to run 1 lap. But in a normal situation, I recommend to have them at 2 or 3. Otherwise, you will have
Hi,
at
Oliver.
least in the
I am
version,
Marcel.
Go, go, go.
I will keep an eye on the other cars for you.
you will have at least in the first few laps
Car left.
not very correct values.
Car on the left. Left clear. Car on the left. Hold the line.
So I will have to run now 2
Clear on the left.
laps, and then I will go to the
Attention
side
left.
and we will run
Left
some
is clear.
preparation
Car on the left.
without being in the
Car on
traffic.
the left. Left clear. Behind on the left.
So let me have a little bit of fun for a few laps.
Car on the left behind you. Car on the left. Hold the line. Still there. Left clear. Behind on the left. Attention in
Cross the
sector
start-finish
3. Yellow
line
flag.
the first time.
Track is clear.
The engineer and the strategist will be available, and you will get a greeting from the engineer too, so that you know that they are there.
Hi Oliver, here is Tom. I will take care of your car today. And you will have support from our strategist Andrew. And now good luck.
So Tom is our engineer today. If I ask him now to plan a pit stop, I do it now by pressing a button.
second. We have a blue screen here. Car on the left behind you. Give me a minute. Behind on the left.
So you got the answer that there is a blue screen
Green flag.
from Windows NT. It means that he's still gathering data before he can calculate pit stop.
Well done, mate. The fastest lap so far.
So,
Car on the right behind you. Yellow flag in sector 1.
okay. Peter, is the sound okay?
There's no sound.
No
Good
sound.
start. We were able to defend our
but-
starting position.
Oh, okay. That's not so good. Can't fix this for now. But what I do now is I will ask Tom, that's my race engineer, to plan a pit stop. Hey, Tom. Okay.
Okay, give me a second.
He's planning a pit stop now.
Tom here.
You only said
I
you
recommend
don't-
this for pit stop number 1. Refueling
pressed
is
the
not
button.
necessary.
Ah,
We
okay.
will use dry tires in tire set number 1. We have some changes for the pressures. 26.5 psi front left. Front right 26.4. Rear left 26.6.
No sound.
26.3 psi in the rear right tire. Shall I instruct the pit crew?
I think in the recording it's fine. Okay, now we have a plan for the pit stop. He says refueling is not necessary, but he needs to change some tire
Faster car
pressures.
approaching. Watch
What I
out.
can now do is I can ask him to change the plan. For example,
Faster car coming up behind you.
hey Tom,
I am here. What can I do for you?
can you increase the pressure front left by 0.1?
You asked me to increase the pressure of the front left tire by 0.1 psi at the next pit stop, right?
Yeah, Discord can't hear the output. He says, okay, you asked me to increase the pressure, is that right? Yes, of course.
Okay, give me a second. The crew is informed about your change.
Okay,
Is there anything else to
crew is
change?
informed about the change, so we changed the plan he created by the data. When I now say that the pit stops should be prepared, the pit stop dialog will open and all the settings will be entered into the dialog. I will do this now. Can you prepare the pit stop?
Roger, I come back to you as soon as possible.
Jetzt geht now the
We will
pit
be
stop
ready when
dialog
you are.
opens.
We are ready for the pit stop. The crew is
And
waiting for you.
he will start to enter the values into the dialog. As said, refueling is not necessary, and now he enters the
Faster car
values.
behind you.
And what we can now do, after everything has been entered into the settings, we can still change the settings. For example, we are running another 1 or 2 laps and we see the tire pressures are still not correct. What we can do, we can go back to the planning phase and create a new plan and so on. But if we have configured controls on our button box or Stream Deck to control the pit stop settings, we can use these now to change the already dialed in settings. For example, I have on my button box several buttons to change the tire pressures. I will now press the button to increase front left. Pit stop dialog opens. The pressure has
The crew
been
is informed
increased.
about your change.
And the engineer has recognized that and says the crew is informed about your change. So he knows that the cold tire pressures for the next stint will be increased by 0.1 at the front left, which is important for the calculation for the pit stop after the next one. Okay. Sorry, Peter, that you can't hear any sound output.
Faster car is approaching. Watch out.
No problem.
Okay. So now, after everything has been dialed,
Faster car coming up behind you.
Track is clear. A faster car is behind you. You got a blue flag. Behind on the right. Car on the right. Right clear.
Faster car coming up behind
Car
you.
behind you.
can now find the way to the pits. A little bit sketchy using cold tires.
Car at the rear. Behind on the left. Car at the rear. Car on the left behind you. Behind on the left.
Hopefully the sound
A faster car
output
is
is
behind
really
you.
on the recording.
Attention in sector 3.
Yellow flag.
Yellow flag.
Be careful there.
Car at the rear. Attention behind. You got a blue flag.
So now we're going into the pit. This is also recognized by the race engineer.
Okay, let the crew do their job. Check ignition, relax and prepare for engine restart.
Okay, he recognized that we are in the pit and tells us to relax a little bit before we head on to the track after the stop.
Come on, let's go.
Okay, I stopped this here and quit ACC.
Yeah, this was great. Thanks for the excellent job.
Okay, now we are back on our presentation screen. Switch windows here. Okay, this is it. Any questions?
Trying to think of the question I had, but I cannot remember.
Okay.
But no, I think it's clear.
Okay. So the most important step, at least for ACC and race room racing experience, is to have these search images dialed so that you can also handle pit stop settings, for example, without tire change or using wet tires or situations where refueling is not allowed and all that stuff. The rest is more or less straightforward. You You must remember that pit stop management is a two-phase process. First plan, then possibly adjust the changes, and then prepare this pit stop, which means the settings are transferred to the simulation and then go to the pit. That's it. Okay, then if there are no further questions, I will stop this here, and hopefully there is the sound recording fine, at least for the video. So maybe you can take a look at the video afterwards when I've uploaded it. So thanks again, bye bye, and see you next week.